Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Acting Deputy President. The 14th of December is now going to be one of the dates that the nation will never forget. And as we come together as leaders in our country to offer our condolences, I happened to be on that beach at the beginning of that day and collected some shells, walked along the beach, and hours later, of course, could hear the sirens wailing and our sense of our country's safety completely evaporating. And I think it is just so shocking to hear that so many Jewish Australians now would say that they feel safer in a war-torn country than they do in our country. And the fact that we have failed these people it's very hard to take. I would say that there are a few other communities that have given more than they have received from Australia. And the thing about the eastern suburbs of Sydney is that it is a very open and very strong community. It's a very accepting, and it is also a very diverse community. And it has had Jewish Australians at the centre of it for 200 years or more. And so the attack on the Jewish community has been felt greatly across the eastern suburbs. Greatly. Every community group, every school, everyone. And of course it transcends the eastern suburbs, but that is the epicentre. And I feel so sorry that we have let a community down that has done so much for our country. And that's why it is so regrettable that I believe it was avoidable. Now, in terms of the 15 people that we lost, I do want to mention a few of them today. Many have mentioned already Alexander Kleiman, who was a Holocaust survivor, of course survived the Holocaust but was murdered in Australia. Reuven Morrison, who threw a brick at the terrorist. His daughter said, he said, in fact, a year ago, "We came here with the view that Australia is the safest country in the world and the Jews would not be faced with such anti-Semitism in the future." Where we can bring up our kids in a safe environment. That's what he said. And then there is Rabbi Eli Schlanger, who was a servant of that community, much like the rabbis that are well known to me, Sloven, Wolf and Castell. And then Matilda. Her parents described her as a softie who loved animals, practiced judo and rarely wanted to be away from her sister. As it was widely reported, she was called Matilda because she was the first Australian in that family. And of course her parents, who had fled Ukraine, wanted to raise their child in a safe country, the same country that Mr. Morrison had described he believed that he was emigrating to many decades ago. But the truth is that we ruined their lives. We destroyed their freedom and their happiness. And at the Bondi Vigil, which was conducted about a week after the attack, David Campbell led a rendition of Waltz and Matilda, which was very moving, as was the rendition of the famous Seekers song. And I have to say, I felt to myself, I said to myself, how terrible it is that these people who love our country so much have been so hurt. And then there were the heroes, Sophia and Boris Gorman, driving past, trying to relieve a terrorist of a gun. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, well documented today, incredible. And then there was Tash Williamson, who was working at the petting zoo, and she shielded Matilda's sister, Summer. Now the community stepped up. The surf clubs, Bondi and North Bondi, members and the lifesavers, just as they did during the bushfires when the Bondi Surf Club became a hub for transmitting goods down to southern New South Wales where there were significant fires. I want to make special mention of Josh Farquhar, who's the president of the North Bondi RSL, and they did an incredible job. They set up the community hub where you had Lifeline, St John Ambulance, the Red Cross and chaplains meeting there on a daily basis. Some of the members of the RSL in particular, Max Streeter, Henry Jameson, Kia Mia and Oliver Carlton, actually ran into danger and supported some of the victims on the day. There was first aid issued to gunshot victims, and of course, as the largest RSL in New South Wales, with many recently active service people, they were well positioned to support in that incredibly stressful environment. And the club remained a hub over those weeks, and I want to thank and acknowledge Mr Farquhar's incredible leadership. Rabbi Yossi Friedman, for 30 days in a row, he conducted memorial services where he read all the names. Rabbi Friedman conducted 118 memorial services where he read the names. And unlike me, I don't think he cried once. He must have a much stronger constitution. But for anyone that was able to be present at Bondi after those attacks, they would have seen the rabbi's presentation, and that gave the community something to coalesce around. And I think he showed incredible poise and dignity, and he showed leadership. He provided people with an outlet when they needed something, and I want to acknowledge the rabbi's service. Police, emergency services workers, the New South Wales Board of Jewish Deputies, and David Ossip, of course, the CEO, and Alex Rivchin from the Executive Council of Australian Jury. I also want to mention, I'm loath to mention politicians in a condolence motion, but I do want to mention Will Namesh, who is the Mayor of Waverley, and Councillor Namesh said in the immediate aftermath that this is part of our history now, and I think what we do next is extremely important for our community. Never again, can't be just words, it needs to be action. And so I'd say, I mean, in my mind, there are effectively three things that happened here. We had extreme views where people had become adherents of mutation of a religion, where they became desperate to kill Jews. They were desperate to kill Jews, a father and son who were inspired by Islamic State, and if they hadn't been able to get guns, they would have got bombs. And the fact that they were radicalised here in Australia as Australians, a migrant, a naturalised man and an Australian-born man, they are our citizens. It happened on our watch, and now this is our problem to fix. The failure to rein in anti-Semitism over these last few years, I mean, the community knew that they were sitting ducks. And we would try and get information, we'd try and get briefings, try and warn that there was no equivalence here. And I guess the frustration I have is that every time we talked about anti-Semitism, someone else would say Islamophobia, or someone else would say there's some other group being in great danger. But I mean, the truth is that the only people who live in cages in this country are Jews. Australian Jews live in cages. That is the truth. And unfortunately, the moral fog here has sadly created Australia now as one of the most anti-Semitic countries on earth. I mean, it is commonplace now to hear in the Jewish community that we feel safer in Israel than do in Australia. This is our great shame. This is our great shame. The false equivalence between the actions of Israel and Australian Jews is a disgrace. It was a cartoon in the papers last week. It's a disgrace. I mean, you know, imagine if you said, oh, I'm going to blame Australian Muslims for the views of the government of Pakistan. I mean, you'd be run out of the country. So we've got to get serious about this. We have become one of the most anti-Semitic nations on earth. It's happened somehow, but we've got to address that. And the third piece is, of course, the failure of law enforcement and the failure of intelligence. Now, of course, in our system of government, the Westminster system, the elected officials have to take responsibility, but I do think that in this case that the people who are leading the agencies, they need to consider their positions. I mean, we have had a religious massacre in this country. We've never had one before. I'm so overhearing people talk about Port Arthur and other things. There is no equivalence. This was an attack. This was not some random killing. They were killed because they were Jews. That's why they were killed. And so those are the three things. Extreme mutation of Islam, a failure to provide leadership on anti-Semitism, and the issue of a massive failure on intelligence and law enforcement. So, of course, the inquiry should look at these failures. Of course it should. And we look forward to seeing exactly what it comes back with. But we've also got to look at other economic sanctions that we can apply, frankly, against our own citizens. If we can't deport people, then we need to look at how we can turn off the financial taps. That's very important. And so I just say that, you know, you can have as many laws as you want on the books here in Canberra, okay? But no one gives a rat's if they're not enforced. And in New South Wales, we have a law that says that it is illegal to incite violence against people based on their racial heritage. And that law's been on the books for years. Sure, it was tweaked a bit last year, but that's a law on the books. So the answer here isn't necessarily having more and more laws. The answer is being honest about the problem and getting better at law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement is porous in this country, not just in relation to this issue, but it is, unfortunately, a problem that we all have. And I regret very much that in a condolence motion these matters have to be canvassed. But I think we owe it to the victims of this attack to be honest and frank and try and work together to find solutions to this problem that we all have now as Australians, because there is no equivalence between anti-Semitism and other issues right now in Australia. These are the only people that are living like this. All forms of discrimination are abhorrent. But right now, this is the priority. And the risk is that we will lose these people. Right? They have the right of return. We could lose some of the best Australians that we've had in this past 250 years unless we fail to take this seriously. So I want to again say that I can't believe this happened in our country. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to all the families. And I want to work with everyone here to make sure that it never does happen again, because this is not Australia if we fail to protect minorities. We've always done a good job at protecting minority interests, and that is going to be the mark of a good society and our country's safety and prosperity in the future.